tonight, let's talk about sex. I think most of us would agree that it can be one of life's great pleasures. And whilst not everyone has as much as they want, for people living with disabilities, it's even more challenging. Now the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, Stuart Robert, wants to make it harder. Last year, the federal court ruled that scheme participants could access specialised sex services if it was deemed reasonable and necessary. But the government is planning to introduce legislation banning them.
Now, the Commonwealth has never paid for prostitutes. It's never used taxpayers' money, and nor have the states and territories. So I've asked the states and territories to join with me, because the law requires unanimity across the Commonwealth and the states and territories, for us to say that prostitutes will not be paid for by taxpayers' money. Participants are welcome to avail themselves of anything that is lawful, and they can pay for it themselves.
So, what exactly are these services? Saul Isbiste is the president of Touching Base. This is an organisation that connects people with disabilities with sex workers and therapists.
It's important for people to recognise that achieving sexual intimacy with others goes beyond just the sexual act. It has considerable benefits for a person's sense of self-esteem. It may assist them, if they've been sexually abused, find opportunities to set boundaries around relationships. We know that there's been a lot of sexual abuse of people with disability, but not to pathologise also the sexuality of people with disability. It's one of the more high-level needs which comes through to Touching Base on occasions is from people who have Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which often means that they have a very foreshortened life. They may only live to be a teenager or into their 20s. And often Touching Base has inquiries from families who are supporting usually their sons. It affects men more than women, this particular disease. But they want to go through that passage of life of losing their virginity before they die. And they seek a safe and consensual environment to do so. I mean, if you've only got one or two chances to have sex before you die, you probably want to make sure you're going to engage with someone who's competent and able to, help you achieve the sorts of pleasures that we would all hope to achieve through sexual engagement.
Now, Sam, we heard some examples there from Touching Base, but can you explain to people who might not understand why it is that people with disability would need any sex services or sex support, why they do?
Who knew that we'd have to be talking about our sex lives on national TV yet again? It's one of those things. So primarily this is an issue. The inflammatory language of using the word prostitute, I think, is to generate outrage, just to make it clear that they're trying to open the door to bring in a whole bunch of changes, and they think that Australia will fall for this kind of outrage thing of, the disabled people are using prostitutes instead of sex workers, So I think that's a bit naughty. But really, disabled people don't understand our lives. They don't understand that women are quite often the victim of rape, and quite often people need to have a sex therapist, and for people to have somebody who knows what they're talking about to teach them about respectful relationships, about touch, what's good touch, what's bad touch. There's a whole range of things. There's sperm retrieval for people who have just broken their necks. There's even like reconnecting with your body if you're a guy who's just broken your neck and, you don't have any idea how to make your wife smile again. There's also the proposal that they're going to ban sex aids of all kinds, which of course means that nobody could get modified sex toys and aids. So there's a whole bunch of wrongness in here, and the sector's quite disappointed that the interview went forward with that language as well.
Do you think that people get confused between what is a sex therapist and what is a sex worker?
Yeah, I think so. And it's a tricky thing to talk about because people have different ideas about what is right and what is wrong and what should be funded through the public purse, So I know that for some people in the public system, we're able to fund Viagra. I have no interest at all in middle-aged men being able to have a great sex life. But that doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter if I think what roads should be built. So really there's like a whole level of interference here. There were sexual services funded under the old state schemes, and probably just nobody ever talked about it particularly. Right. If you can't use your hands and you don't have arms, is it reasonable that you're able to masturbate? Well, we get help for everything. You know, for a lot of people, we have to demonstrate that we have daily care needs. And so, you know, is it a reasonable thing? Well, yes. Is it a reasonable thing that a sex worker actually does that thing? Well, probably at 10 o'clock at night, the nice lady from the Christian, you know, organisation that does your care and support is not going to come out and assist you with that.
Now, Jennifer, I know this is something that you've been uncertain about, whether this should be, you know, this should be taxpayers should pay for this. So I just want to know if you're convinced now after hearing Sam. And can I add to that point that she made about Viagra and other erectile dysfunction drugs, which are on PBS? 65 million prescriptions since 1998, obviously because this is seen as a beneficial thing for someone's health. What do you think?
Yes, well, I was listening very intently to Sam because when this question came up, as she says, you know, normally most people don't talk about it unless it directly affects them, probably don't think about it too much. So I have been thinking about it, and certainly the idea, I think, of the government in a sense is right to say, oh, look, you know, most people won't like the idea of taxpayers' money going to fund prostitutes for people with disabilities. That's just kind of, that's fine if they want to do that, but it shouldn't be taxpayers' money. But the point that Sam made about Viagra, for example, and public prescriptions makes me think again. I think, oh, well, you know, all these areas are a bit tricky. But, you know, the trouble is, while I can see that the idea of therapy and counselling and all those things, maybe sex aids, I don't know, that it just kind of gets to be a very vague and grey area, which, you know, over time is going to be abused by certainly some people. So I'm still a bit undecided on this, to be honest, and it just depends how it was applied and how it was written, and I can't quite be definitive on what I think should happen.
Sam, do you want to respond to that? Because I know that the NDIS is something that's extremely closely monitored.
Yeah, it is. And people hear about fraud and they hear about rorting the system. The majority, the vast majority of rorting the system is done by unethical service providers and people who pop up and start, you know, disability care organisations and rip off money. So there's a very, very low percentage of people who are rorting the system. It's very, very hard to get the basic support that you need, like a wheelchair, you know. So the idea that people are running out and hiring sex workers left, right and centre is a lovely idea, but it's not a real one. You know, we have to link our support very clearly to our goals and evidence that we're meeting our goals. So, you know, those ideas I think are probably just not realistic, and it really is an excuse to sneak in legislation through the back door.
And the court found it had to be deemed reasonable and necessary. Norman, just quickly, what is the medical case?
So the medical case here is the NDIS, through person-directed care, you draw down what you need to actually return yourself to as near as possible mainstream life or rehabilitate you to be the best you possibly can. And I think what Sam alluded to there is there are lots of problems with the NDIS where people are actually drawing down stuff they need to get as best as they can, and sexual therapy should be part of that. But
because medically it's good for people?
Well, it reduces psychological distress and normalises your life to a great extent. And that's what we're trying to do, is mainstream as much as possible people back into life.
Now, I want to bring Peter in. We're almost out of time. But Peter, you've got many quivers to your bow. I think potentially one of my favourites, that you used to run an erotic bookstore. And this is, but you also used to work in the disabled sector in the 80s for a decade. So I know you have strong views on this. What do you think?
Well, it wasn't an erotic bookstore, it was a normal bookstore, but I think this is people's lives.
Wait a minute, what? You've spoken about this before.
Oh, it had an erotic part of it.
An erotic section, okay.
And Viagra under the table. Viagra under the table.
But look, seriously, these are people's lives. Experts are giving advice on it. They're doing it for a whole range of things. Sex life is pretty normal. People with disabilities want to have a normal life, and people making these decisions, they've sensationalised this by using the word prostitute, as Sam said. just stay out of people's lives. Let the experts do what they need to do and let it run its course. I think it's disgraceful that they're even doing this.
To even question it. So how significant a section was it in your store, though, Peter?
The one that got a lot of attention, but I got to tell you, philosophy. We sold a lot of philosophy books as well. Okay, so it was
a lot of philosophy books. Okay, that's good. You know,
Good for chatting up. Good for chatting up.
The full spectrum. All right, loads of food, lots of food for thought tonight. I want to thank our panel: Norman Swan, Jennifer Hewitt, Peter Strong, and Sam Connor from WA. And I hope you have an excellent evening. You're going to have Ellen Fanning with you back on The Box tomorrow night. I hope you have a great evening. Good night.